I don't think same-sex marriage is actually a thing. I think it is an imposition on reality that doesn't line up with what we know to be true about human biology, sociology, anthropology, and almost every other ology you could bring up.
There's a follow-up question that we kind of received. It doesn't really tie in, but I have this question too because we have 8 children in our family,
So
and
this is a little known
that
fact about
includes
Wayne,
all
who's usually
boys. Yeah.
behind the scenes. Now is in the limelight here on this podcast. 8 children. Congratulations. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. It's a lot of fun, but it usually means that I can't be on video because I'm holding other
That's
kids
true. And
usually.
it
But
definitely
inside of
means you
this,
married up. So we can all say that.
yes, hands
Hands down.
down. But there's a question that one of our listeners asked, saying that she has 4 married sons, 6 grandsons, and she's looking for some books that would be kind of the best on raising sons, raising young men in this culture. So, what do you have to say to me and to this listener?
Yeah, well, congratulations. That's amazing. Those are loud Christmas mornings. I would imagine. I have one boy, and the volume level has gone to a brand new place than at least as what we remember from the older girls. But and you know that all too well, Wayne. I honestly think there's 2 books that I really like on this. One would be a little bit older. The other aims more at dads. The other one aims more at sons. The Dangerous Book for Boys is really fascinating. It's just a whole lot of ways to get your hands dirty, a whole lot of ways to do it, though, in a way that, encourages innovation, creativity, problem solving, building, exploring, curiosity. That's one thing. I usually am taking my son in the morning to his preschool program while my wife is teaching our the girls at a local kind of classical school thing. That's kind of how we do it. And I always pray in the morning on the way, as we pray on the way there, that God would give him curiosity, that God would make him curious. I just think that's one of the things that makes us different than the animals. It's one of the things that should elevate him as someone who can both think and wonder and figure things out, not take things at face value, which I think is extremely important in an age of information. And I feel like the Dangerous Book for Boys does some of that. So my son's not quite old enough for it yet, but it's a lot of fun. I think, by the way, along those lines, even when they are too young, stories that spark the imagination. He's deep into Narnia already. He's somewhere between 3 and 4. Not that he's reading it, but his sisters are reading it to him. That story, seeing the world as an adventure, I think is really critical for God unlocking parts of who He is. The other one that I still really think is fantastic, I think Dr. Dobson was at his best with bringing up girls and bringing up boys. Just fantastic books, absolutely fantastic books. I've appreciated both of them. So those are at the top of my list, and bringing up boys would be aimed obviously more towards the parents. What does it look like to initiate these sorts of things into the lives of developing children?
Yeah, that's great. Now, looking a little bit at question 2, and this is kind of a good one, John, when we look at a lot of the things that are happening in our culture. And this questioner writes, I work at a very liberal public university. I'm noticing an increasing number of colleagues, including their preferred pronouns, in quotes, in their email signatures and Zoom usernames. So far, all the ones that I've seen have pronouns that align with their obvious biological gender, which indicates to me that they're only including pronouns to demonstrate their support for the transgender movement. While that is currently their choice, I fear that it may be only a matter of time before the university decides to require all employees to display their pronouns. If that happens, I would be highly inclined to refuse because I view that as being forced onto the bandwagon, so to speak. I've heard you often state that we shouldn't live by lies, and that's a concept in response to these LGBTQ issues. So I realized that if I were to put my biological pronoun in my email signature, that would not be telling a lie. But however, a large part of my conscience still feels that would be going against the truth. And in a way, because then it would appear as though I agree or I am going along with the transgender movement. What are your thoughts on this?
Wow, it's just amazing that there's about maybe 7 or 8 times a week, Wayne, when we respond to these questions or looking at a news story, and I think to myself, this is the conversation we're currently having. And not that it's a bad question, it's a great question, but it shouldn't be something that a university professor worries or wonders about, right? I mean, seriously, this is the justice issue of the day that they're wrestling with. And I just think it's something that people need to take note of, and especially parents before they send their kids off to these universities. What conversations are they actually having on campus? If these are the ones, then there's some things that are getting in the way of a good education. And by the way, I just want to just be really, really clear. I'm not condemning this question at all. It's the question that's been forced. We don't always, as N.T. Wright says, we don't always get to choose what we talk about. And I've had the same feeling with conversations I'm having with my kids. Like, I didn't plan to have a conversation about same-sex marriage with my daughter when she was 6. That was something the culture chose for me, and God chose to put me in this culture. So here we are, and that's kind of where this professor finds themselves. I'm really grateful for the way this person is thinking about this, and I think that their impulse that to even kind of go here is validating a concept that shouldn't be validated. And that's one of the struggles I think a lot of Christians feel like they're in the middle of right now. I certainly do. Like, for example, to use the categories of the acronym LGBTQIA is an issue of convenience, so that we all know kind of linguistically what we're talking about. But am I actually, by using that chosen language, saying too much? Am I actually saying something about someone's identity? Or do I need to put things in quotes? You'll see, for example, I don't buy into same-sex marriage as a concept. So what I try to do, I may forget here and there, but what I try to do whenever I talk about that is to put it, say things like so-called marriage or so-called marriage equality, or put it in quotes in articles, things like that. Because I don't think same-sex marriage is actually a thing. I think it is an imposition on reality that doesn't line up with what we know to be true about human biology, sociology, anthropology, and almost every other ology you could bring up. So that's what happens when cultural forces literally deny observable realities, right? So you have to struggle with what language to use and what language not to use. I think right now to display pronouns is to believe that pronoun usage is a social construct that doesn't actually refer to reality. I mean, folks have heard me say, calling someone by their quote unquote new name, if you're not a parent or someone who grew up with them or whatever, doesn't seem to me to be in the same category as using a pronoun, because a pronoun refers to a gendered reality, he, she. And that is saying something that's not true. So to use them, to think it's a thing important enough to use, I think suggests that pronouns are social constructs. They're matters of preference rather than matters of reference to reality. And second, that misgendering is actually a thing, right? Several years ago, I remember realizing, coming across a word called cisgender. And I thought to myself, that's not a word. That's a made up something to make 99% of the population in the history of the planet in the same category as those who struggle with what should be called some sort of a disorder, a mental disorder, or a gender dysphoria. Tragically and horrifically, many of them suffer with it. But to say then, it's basically to take a normal understanding of human existence, in which our sense of who we are aligns with our biological realities of chromosomes and hormones and genitalia and reproductive organs, and saying, well, that's not normal. That's not the way it actually usually is. There's not a disability over here because that's not the normal ability over there. That's what the word cisgender actually did. And in the same way, misgendering, saying that you can actually misgender someone by agreeing with their dysphoria, their disconnect. It would be horrific if I had a friend or a family member who struggled with an eating disorder because they look in the mirror and they think they're fat and they're not, and they literally are emaciating their body in order to align their inner perspective with the image that's in front of them. And if I went along with that, that would be a horrific, horrific thing to do. And it would be a way of harming someone in order not to run afoul of the social currents. And I just can't see any difference here. Uh, in terms of going along with the transgender movement. Now, this is a small way to go along with it. Um, and I think it would be interesting. I still think, too, that the live not by lies uh, mantra is a wonderful thing to live by. And also the Daniel option, which is there's usually a third option. And I don't know what it is in this situation, but I just want to encourage people, too, that you remember the king's servant said, hey, the king said, you either got to eat this meat sacrificed to idols or you die. Which one is it? Daniel's like, I've got a third option. And I think there's third options. I think there's third options so that you don't have to live by lies. I don't know what they are in this situation, but I think the impulse here to go, I'm just not going to do that. I also think that, we'll know when we're getting kicked out of the university because we'll have a big foot in our rear end. And I think that's when you get kicked out of the marriage business, you get kicked out of the bakeries, you get kicked out. Let's be kicked out. Let's stay and be a witness for the truth as long as we possibly can without self-selecting out too early. I don't want to give up the 50-yard line
Yeah.
right off the bat.
Right. When you look at that issue too, I can imagine being in this workplace and having somebody say, "Hey, I've noticed that you didn't follow that policy
Yeah.
or whatever," and there's a need to be educated or have an answer. When you think of that, what are some of the best maybe resources or ways to think about this issue so that when we do, because it's that idea of being prepared in season and out of season, and this is going to be an out of season thing that we might get hit with. What are some of those resources and ways of thinking to engage that so that we can winsomely engage that topic with those that we work with?
Well, obviously Ryan Anderson's book is fantastic on this. Why It Matters for Christians is Andrew Walker's book on God and the transgender movement, I think is what it's called. It's more of a theological look at this, why gender matters biblically and theologically. Ryan's is more sociologically written, deals with the idea of male and female as being built in society as a kind of a grinding point in reality. And by the way, Ryan is going to be teaching on that at the Wilberforce Weekend this coming May in Fort Worth. And we've dedicated actually all day on Friday to look not at the transgender issue, because I don't want to look at the lie, but to look specifically at the, how did God create his image, male and female. It's a very fascinating thing that in Genesis 1, before we know there's going to be an Eve, before there's an Eve to name, there's this phrase, male and female, he created them. And then that grounds so much of what happens in the next chapter when Adam is naming the animals, and there's a gendered reality to the animals, but not a gender counterpart or a sexual counterpart to him. Which would provide the help that he needs and so on. I mean, there's a whole lot theologically going on. So on Friday during the day, we have an equipping intensive on male and female, and Ryan's actually going to be a part of that as well as some others. It's going to be a fantastic time. So those are two resources. But I also want to point people to think hard. Like, you're not going to be able to keep up with all the cultural crazy. The more the world gets disconnected from Scripture, but even more than that, it gets disconnected from reality itself. I mean, that's what Scripture says. When you reject God, you start to make the creation the creator, and then you start to deny reality. That's kind of Romans 1 in a nutshell. And so one of the things that's important is to realize, look, here's where I'm going to stand. Here's what it means for me to be faithful in this kind of a moment. And, of course, that will also hit many of those things during Wilberforce, but I think that live not by lies concept is just super important. And Rod Dreher's book on this tells the story of our, in most recent memory, the Christians on the planet that had to do that. in the face of suffering that we don't face, that we hopefully will not face. Maybe, I don't know, but it seems a long way off from here. But I think we've got to wrestle with what that means. And Solzhenitsyn's original speech, which the title of the book comes from, "Live Not by Lies," is also available online. In fact, come to breakpoint.org. We'll put it in the show notes so you can read it. It's really interesting what Solzhenitsyn was trying to do there to people, saying, look, that it doesn't mean we have to fight every battle. And this kind of goes to the answer to the question here at hand. Do I have to go along with this? Is this worth pushing back on? These are really difficult decisions when you get into how quickly we can be kind of swept downstream. But to say, look, I'm not going to show up at every protest, but here's what I'm committed to. I am not going to say what's not true. That's an important line in the sand that I think we can draw.